The tarmac shimmered under the Nevada sun like molten glass, heat waves distorting the rows of parked aircraft at Nellis Air Force Base. Captain Alina Ghost Volkov stood motionless beside her FA-18E Super Hornet, her flight suit dark with sweat, aviator sunglasses hiding eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. She was checking the weapon's loadout when she felt the hand clamp down on her shoulder ruff, presumptuous, the kind of grip that said someone thought they owned the space you occupied. She turned slowly. The Marine Staff Sergeant towering over her wore the smug expression of someone who'd made assumptions before asking questions. His name tape read Morrison, and the dust on his boots suggested he just arrived from the combat training ranges that sprawled across the desert like a vast proving ground for violence. "Sweetheart, you lost," Morrison's voice carried across the flight line, drawing chuckles from the three Marines flanking him. "Maintenance crew entrance is on the other side. This is a restricted flight operations area." Alina didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at him through those dark lenses while the wind picked up, carrying the smell of jet fuel and heated metal. Around them, aircraft maintenance crews paused their work. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone dropped a wrench that clattered against concrete with a sound like a bell tolling. The silence spread outward in ripples, and Morrison finally noticed. His hand was still on her shoulder, but his grip had loosened, uncertainty creeping into his expression as he registered the absolute stillness that had descended over the flight line. "You should probably remove your hand," Alina said quietly. Her accent carried traces of Moscow winters and Brooklyn summers, a combination that made every word sound like it had traveled a long distance to reach you. "Before you embarrass yourself further." Morrison laughed, but it sounded forced now. "Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are." "Captain Volkov." The voice came from behind Morrison, sharp as a blade. A Navy commander emerged from the operations building, his face pale despite the desert heat. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, I suggest you step back immediately and report to your co for remedial instruction on base protocols." Morrison's hand dropped like he'd touched a hot stove. He turned, looking between the commander and Alina, finally seeing what everyone else on the flight line had already recognized. The two rows of ribbons on her chest, the Top Gun patch worn smooth at the edges, and the small silver trident partially visible beneath her collar that made hardened pilots cross themselves when they thought no one was watching. The interrogation room in the operations building smelled like stale coffee and regulation cleaning solution. Morrison sat across from Commander Hayes, whose expression suggested he was witnessing a career end in real time. Through the observation window, Alina stood with her arms crossed, watching with the detached interest of someone observing weather patterns. Hayes slid a classified personnel file across the table, its cover stamped with enough warning labels to make Morrison's stomach sink. Inside, the first page showed Alina's official photograph, those same emotionless eyes staring out from beneath a heading that read, JSOC Special Activities Division, Aviation Support Element. "Do you understand what you just did?" Hayes asked, his voice carefully controlled. "That pilot you grabbed has a kill count higher than most infantry companies. She's flown support missions for SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, and units, so classified their designations are compartmentalized above your clearance level." Morrison stared at the file. The mission log entries were partially redacted, but enough remained visible to tell a story written in coordinates, target designations, and body counts. 12 years of continuous combat operations, 4 Silver Stars, 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and something else, a handwritten notation from a SEAL team commander that simply read, "Request Volkov for all future operations. She's the only pilot we trust when everything goes wrong." Hayes leaned forward. "Ghost doesn't just fly close air support. She is close air support. SEALs specifically request her because she'll put ordnance within 20 meters of friendly positions when no other pilot will risk it. She once stayed on station for 6 hours during a compromised extraction in Helmand Province, refueling 3 times, taking ground fire the entire time, and landed with 17 bullet holes in her aircraft. The team she was covering, they called her an angel of death, said she killed so precisely, so efficiently, that enemy combatants started surrendering when they heard her aircraft overhead. The commander opened to another section, revealing commendations written in languages Morrison didn't recognize: Russian, Arabic, Pashto. Each one told the same story from different perspectives, a pilot who operated in moral complexities that existed beyond the comfort of clear rules of engagement. Alina Volkov wasn't just feared by enemies, she made allies nervous. Because when she released weapons, people died with mechanical certainty, and she never seemed to lose sleep over the mathematics of violence. Morrison found his voice, though it came out smaller than intended. Why is she here? At Nellie's, this is a training base. Hayes closed the file with finality. Because after 12 years of continuous combat operations, the Pentagon decided she needed to step back before she completely burned out. They assigned her as an adversary tactics instructor, red flag exercises, teaching the next generation. But here's what you need to understand, Staff Sergeant. That woman you grabbed, she's not here because she failed. She's here because she succeeded too well, and it broke something inside her that command is trying to put back together before they deploy her again. Outside the observation window, Alina remained motionless, her reflection ghostly in the tinted glass. She wasn't looking at Morrison anymore. Her gaze had shifted to the flight line visible through the far windows, watching aircraft taxi into position for evening sorties. Hayes followed Morrison's stare and lowered his voice to something like sympathy. The really scary part, she volunteered for every single mission, never turned down a tasking, no matter how impossible. SEALs love her because she'll risk her life without hesitation. Command fears her because they don't know what drives someone to seek out that much violence and come back each time wanting more. The debriefing ended with Morrison's reassignment paperwork already being processed. He left the building to find Alina standing beside her Super Hornet, running her hand along the fuselage like someone greeting an old friend. The aircraft bore scars, patches where panels had been replaced, slight discoloration where repair work had been done. This wasn't a pristine training aircraft. This was a combat veteran, just like its pilot. Morrison approached carefully, keeping his hands visible. "Captain Volkov, I owe you an apology." Alina turned, and for the first time she removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were gray as winter sky and utterly empty of malice or forgiveness, just a flat acceptance of his existence. "You made assumptions based on incomplete information. It happens. But let me tell you something about assumptions, Staff Sergeant. In combat, they get people killed. The enemy you underestimate is the one who puts rounds through your position while you're still figuring out you made a mistake." She replaced her sunglasses and continued her pre-flight inspection, dismissing him with her attention rather than words. Morrison stood there, watching her work, and realized he was seeing something rare: a warrior who'd crossed into territories most people only glimpsed in nightmares. The other pilots on the flight line gave her space, respectful distance, and Morrison understood now it wasn't fear exactly. It was recognition. They knew what she'd done, where she'd been, and they understood that some doors, once opened, changed you in ways that couldn't be undone. As Morrison walked away, a Navy FA-18 pilot approached Alina with a briefing folder. "Ghost, you're scheduled for Red Flag tomorrow. Aggressor tactics against the new F-35 squadron. They're specifically asking for you." Alina took the folder without looking up from her inspection. They always do. The Red Flag briefing room buzzed with the particular energy of pilots about to prove themselves. 50 aircrew from multiple services packed the Space Air Force, Navy, Marines, even 2 RAF pilots on exchange. They represented America's newest fighter pilots, fresh from advanced training and eager to test themselves against the legendary adversary tactics instructors who made Nellie's their hunting ground. On the large display screen, the mission parameters scrolled past: contested airspace scenarios, surface-to-air missile threats, electronic warfare complications. Standard training stuff, except for one element that made everyone in the room sit a little straighter. The aggressor force call sign listed simply as Ghost. Major David Chen, the Air Force F-35A Lightning II flight lead, briefed his section with confidence bordering on arrogance. Remember, these red flag instructors are good, but they're flying legacy aircraft with known limitations. Our sensors will see them before they see us. Our stealth gives us first look, first shot advantage. Stay disciplined, execute the plan, and we'll demonstrate why fifth-generation fighters represent the future. In the back of the room, an older pilot's a Marine Harrier instructor with gray in his hair leaned over to his wingman and whispered, "They have no idea what's coming. Think Ghost will go easy on them." The Marine laughed without humor. "I flew against her 2 years ago. She treated us like practice targets. By the time we figured out where she was, half our flight was already designated dead. The woman flies like she can see the future." The lights dimmed for the intelligence brief, showing the estimated location of enemy forces. Red Air, the designated adversaries who would try to prevent Blue Air from accomplishing their mission objectives. The briefing officer, a captain who'd clearly drawn the short straw, cleared his throat nervously. "Be advised, your primary adversary tomorrow will be a single FA-18E Super Hornet flown by Captain Volkov, call sign Ghost. She'll be operating in accordance with known threat tactics, simulating advanced Russian or Chinese doctrine." One of the younger F-35 pilots raised his hand. "Sir, one aircraft, against our entire strike package." The briefing officer's expression suggested he'd asked the same question once. "Captain Volkov has successfully defeated numerically superior forces in 73% of her red flag engagements. She holds the record for simulated kills in a single Exercise 18 aircraft over a 4-day period. Your flight leads have been briefed on specific tactics she's known to employ, but understand this: she adapts. She learns your patterns faster than you learn hers, and she doesn't fly to survive. She flies to kill." The room went quiet. Someone coughed. Major Chen stood, his confidence only slightly dented. "With respect, Captain, we're in stealth fighters with sensor fusion and network-centric warfare capabilities. Legacy Hornets don't stand a chance in that environment." The briefing officer looked at him with something like pity. "Major, I thought the same thing last year. I was flying an F-35 too. She shot me down first." Alina sat alone in the pilot's locker room, lacing her boots with mechanical precision. The room carried the particular smell of military facilities, everywhere disinfectant trying to mask decades of sweat. On the bench beside her lay her helmet, custom painted in flat gray with a single marking, a white ghost rendered in 3 brushstrokes. The design was minimalist, almost abstract, but pilots who'd seen it in their heads-up displays before being designated dead said it appeared with the finality of death's own signature. She stood and looked at herself in the mirror, not with vanity, but assessment. Physical fitness remained peaked despite 12 years of war. No visible scars on her face, though her body told different stories beneath the flight suit. 3 shrapnel wounds from an SA-7 missile that had proximity detonated close enough to pepper her aircraft. Compression fractures in 2 vertebrae from a hard ejection over Syria that had gone into classified files. Burns on her right forearm from an electrical fire at 20,000 feet. Each mark represented a day she should have died but didn't, and she'd stopped believing in luck years ago. "You ready to ruin their day?" A voice from the doorway made her turn. Commander Lisa Torres, Nellie's Top Gun instructor, and one of the few pilots Alina considered a friend, leaned against the frame. "Those F-35 kids are about to learn some humility." Alina pulled on her survival vest, checking each piece of equipment with practiced efficiency. "They need to understand that technology doesn't replace tactics. Stealth is valuable, but it's not invincibility. The moment they believe their aircraft makes them untouchable, they make mistakes, and mistakes get you killed." Torres stepped inside, lowering her voice. Hayes told me what happened yesterday. Morrison handled. That's all you have to say about it. Alina paused, her hand stilling on a vest buckle. People make judgments based on what they see. I'm 5'6", I look young, and I don't fit their mental image of someone who's dropped ordnance on 200 confirmed targets. Their prejudice is not my problem. Their education is. Torres studied her friend with the careful attention of someone who'd known her through promotions and breakdowns. You know what scares me about you, Alina? It's not that you're good at killing. Lots of pilots are good at it. It's that you don't seem to feel anything about it anymore. You fly these missions training now, but combat before, and you come back the same. Never shaken, never processing, just ready for the next one. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of jet engines on the flight line. Alina finished her equipment check before responding. Feeling things doesn't bring back the people who die when I hesitate. I learned that lesson in Afghanistan. There was a time when I questioned every shot, worried about the moral weight. And while I was questioning, people I was supposed to protect died, so I made a choice. I became the weapon they needed me to be, clean, precise, unflinching. It's not that I don't feel, Lisa. It's that I've learned feelings are luxuries people in my position can't afford. Torres wanted to argue, but what could she say? Alina Volkov had saved more lives through violence than most people saved through peace. The mathematics were undeniable, even if the cost came in pieces of humanity that couldn't be measured. Alina picked up her helmet and headed for the door, then paused. You asked if I'm ready to ruin their day. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm trying to keep them alive. Because if they graduate from here thinking their technology makes them gods, they'll fly into actual combat unprepared for enemies who don't care about American technical superiority. And then they'll die, badly, alone, wondering why their training didn't match reality. This, she gestured toward the flight line, this is mercy. Because I'm the monster they face in controlled conditions, so they learn to survive the real monsters waiting for them overseas. The flight line at dawn was a cathedral of war machines. Alina walked toward her Super Hornet while around her the blue airstrike package prepared for Launchade F-35s, their angular stealth profiles looking alien compared to the conventional aircraft sharing the ramp. Ground crews swarmed the jets, loading simulated weapons pods and checking systems. The F-35 pilots were laughing, confident, their youth apparent in every gesture. They'd trained for this. They were ready. Alina climbed her aircraft's ladder, settling into the cockpit with the familiar comfort of coming home. The ejection seat cradled her. The stick fit her hand like it had been molded for her grip. Around her, switches and displays waited for activation, each one a tool she knew intimately. This particular Super Hornet Bureau number 166,776 had been with her for 6 years. It had been modified beyond standard specifications, upgraded with classified electronic warfare systems and sensor packages that technically shouldn't exist on a training aircraft. The Pentagon allowed it because Alina was testing equipment that would eventually filter down to fleet squadrons. She was always testing something, always pushing boundaries. She powered up systems and ran through checklist items with mechanical efficiency. Engines online, hydraulics green, weapons systems simulating correctly. Radio checks with the control tower came through clear, and across the ramp, the F-35s were beginning their startup sequences. Major Chen's voice came across the tactical frequency, coordinating his strike package with the professionalism of someone who'd graduated top of his class. Blue Air Flight check-in. One by one, the F-35 pilots reported ready status. Their call signs were predictable: Viper, Hammer, blade names chosen to sound aggressive and capable. Alina listened without transmitting, invisible on their networks, a ghost in both name and electronic signature. The tower controller's voice crackled through. Ghost, you are cleared for early launch. Proceed to holding area Alpha 7 and await Blue Air departure. Alina acknowledged and taxied out, the Super Hornet's engine spooling up with a sound like controlled fury. She took the runway and pushed throttles forward, feeling 22,000 pounds of thrust punch her back into the seat as the aircraft accelerated. Rotation speed came fast, and she pulled back on the stick, leaving Earth behind. The moment of liftoff always brought a brief sense of peace, the transition from terrestrial creature to something else, something that belonged to sky and speed. She climbed to altitude and orbited the designated holding area, watching the F-35s launch in pairs below her. They formed up efficiently, their formation tight, their communications professional. These were good pilots, well-trained, and they were about to learn that good wasn't always good enough. Ghost Blue Air is airborne and proceeding to mission area. You are cleared hot. Treat them like enemy aircraft. No restrictions. Alina smiled, though no one could see it behind her mask and visor. Copy, engaging. She turned hard, banking the Super Hornet into a diving spiral that bled altitude and built speed. The hunt had begun. The Nevada desert stretched below like crumpled brown paper, its mountains and valleys offering terrain that could hide aircraft or expose them depending on tactics and timing. Major Chen led his F-35 strike package northeast toward the simulated target, a mock enemy installation that they'd be expected to destroy while defending against the Red Air threat. His sensors showed clean airspace ahead, the sophisticated displays painting a god's-eye view of the battle space. No contacts, no threats. Just empty sky, and the confidence that came from flying the most advanced fighter jet in the world. Blue Air maintained formation. Viper 3, you're drifting, tighten up. The flight corrected, and Chen checked his displays again. They were 30 miles from the target area, and still no sign of Ghost. Maybe she was running late. Maybe she'd experienced maintenance issues. The F-35's sensor fusion made his aircraft nearly impossible to surprise. It should detect any threat long before that threat could target him. Then his radar warning receiver lit up. The tone in his headset was brief, barely a chirp, and by the time Chen processed it, the display was already showing a firing solution on one of his wingmen. The controller's voice came through coldly professional. Viper 4 is dead. Surface-to-air missile kill. Break right, Blue Air, Bandit is in the battle space. Chen's head swiveled, trying to visually acquire the threat, but the sky remained empty. Where the hell did that come from? No one answered because no one knew. Alina had used the terrain, staying low in a valley approach that masked her radar signature until the last moment. She'd fired a simulated AIM-120 AMRAAM from beyond visual range, tagged one F-35, and disappeared again before anyone could react. The whole engagement had taken 12 seconds. Spread out, Chen ordered, his voice tight. She can't hide forever. Use your sensors, find her. But Alina wasn't hiding. She was repositioning, using the F-35's own tactics against them. Stealth made them confident, but it also made them predictable. They flew patterns based on the assumption their sensors were superior. They expected to detect threats at range and engage from safe distances. Alina flew like sensors didn't exist, like warfare was visceral and close, and technology was just another variable to be exploited. She came up through a canyon, hugging the rock walls so close that her wingtips seemed to scrape stone. The Super Hornet's older design actually gave her an advantage here. It was built for carrier operations, designed to handle tight spaces and violent maneuvers that fourth-generation airframes could sustain better than their sophisticated descendants. She pulled up hard, breaking into the F-35's formation from below, and selected 2 targets before anyone realized she was there. Fox 2, Fox 2. Her voice on the tactical net was calm, almost gentle, as she simulated firing 2 AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles. Viper 6 is dead. Viper 2 is dead. The controller's voice marked 2 more F-35s as killed, their pilots too stunned to even protest. Chen rolled hard, trying to get a visual or a radar lock, but Alina was already gone, diving back toward the terrain. She's killing us piecemeal. Someone get me a goddamn firing solution. In her cockpit, Alina checked her fuel and smiled behind her oxygen mask. 3 kills in less than 2 minutes. The F-35 pilots were good, but they were fighting the way they'd been trained, relying on technology, trusting their sensors, believing the doctrine that said fifth-generation fighters dominated the battle space. She was fighting the way she'd learned in places where doctrine met reality and reality won. She was fighting like someone who expected technology to fail, who planned for worst-case scenarios, who had survived so many impossible situations that she no longer believed in tactical certainty. The engagement continued for another 20 minutes, and by the end, only 2 F-35s remained simulated alive. Chen was one of them, more through luck than skill. The controller called "knock it off," ending the exercise, and the aircraft began returning to base. The radio frequencies stayed mostly quiet during the return flight. No one wanted to discuss what had just happened. After landing, the pilots assembled in the debriefing room, and the silence was thick enough to taste. Alina entered last, carrying her helmet under one arm, her flight suit still dark with sweat. She moved to the front of the room where the large display screen showed the recorded tactical picture, every aircraft's position, every missile shot, every moment of the engagement laid out in unforgiving detail. Major Chen stared at the screen, his earlier confidence replaced by the hollow look of someone who just discovered their worldview was incomplete. 6 aircraft lost in 20 minutes against a single aggressor, in a scenario where they'd held every technological advantage. Alina set her helmet down and faced the assembled pilots. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the mockery they might have expected, only a teacher's patient clarity. You flew exactly the way you were trained. You trusted your sensors. You followed proper formation tactics. You did everything right according to the book. And you died. Do you understand why? No one answered. Alina continued. Because the book assumes your enemies are stupid. It assumes they'll fly predictably, engage at range, give you time to employ your advantages. But real enemies, the Russians, the Chinese, the truly dangerous pilots you might face, they know your advantages too, and they've spent years figuring out how to make those advantages irrelevant. She walked to the display and pointed to the first kill. Viper 4. I fired from inside a radar shadow created by that ridgeline. Your sensors couldn't see me until I'd already released weapons. You were watching the sky, looking for threats at altitude. I came from below because that's where you weren't looking. She moved to the next sequence. Viper 6 and 2. I exploited your formation spacing. You were too spread out for mutual support but too close together to avoid a single threat. I came vertical because your sensors are optimized for horizontal acquisition. By the time your aircraft computed my position, I was already firing. She faced them directly. Here's what you need to understand. Technology is powerful. Your F-35s are incredible machines, but technology creates dependencies. You depend on your sensors being better. You depend on your stealth keeping you hidden. You depend on engaging from beyond visual range. But what happens when those dependencies fail? When you face an enemy with better electronic warfare? When you're forced into a close-range fight? When your missile misses, and suddenly you're trading positions with someone who wants you dead? Major Chen found his voice, though it came out defensive. Captain, with all due respect, you're flying a fourth-generation aircraft with known limitations. In a real fight, our stealth would prevent you from ever getting close enough to employ those tactics. Alina nodded slowly. Would it? Tell me, Major, how many actual combat missions have you flown? The silence answered for him. She continued, her voice gentler now. I've flown 247 combat sorties. I've been shot at by every threat system our enemies employ. I've had missiles detonate close enough that I could count the fragments. I've fought against Russian pilots in Syria who knew exactly what an F-A-18 could do and still tried to kill me. And here's what I learned. Stealth is valuable right up until the moment someone figures out where you are anyway. And then it's just an expensive coffin. She paused, letting that sink in. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here to make you dangerous. Because if you graduate from Nellie's thinking your aircraft makes you invincible, You will die, probably in your first real engagement. And I've watched too many good pilots die because they believe their technology more than their training. She picked up her helmet and turned to leave, then stopped at the door. We run this again tomorrow, same scenario, but this time I want you to forget everything your sensors tell you. Fly like they're broken. Fight like I can see you perfectly. Assume I know your position, your weapons count, your fuel state, and then try to survive. Because that's what combat actually is, survival against someone who's trying very hard to make sure you don't. The door closed behind her, and the assembled pilots sat in stunned silence, staring at the tactical replay that showed exactly how thoroughly they'd been dismantled. That evening, Alina sat alone in the officers' club, a glass of vodka untouched on the bar in front of her. She wasn't much of a drinker. Alcohol dulled reflexes, and she'd spent too many years needing those reflexes sharp to develop the habit. But sometimes the ritual of ordering a drink, of holding the cold glass, provided a structure for thoughts that didn't organize themselves easily. Commander Torres found her there, sliding onto the adjacent stool. I watched the replay. You destroyed them. I educated them. Same thing in your lexicon. Torres ordered her own drink and studied her friend's profile. You know what they're saying about you, the younger pilots. Alina didn't respond, which Torres took as permission to continue. They're calling you the ghost of Nellies, not just your call sign, the actual ghost. They think you're haunted by something, that you fly with this intensity, because you're trying to outrun ghosts that follow you from all those combat missions. Alina finally lifted her glass, held it to the light, watched the vodka catch and refract the bar's dim illumination. They're not entirely wrong. You want to talk about it? No, the word was flat, final. Then, after a long moment, but I should probably tell someone eventually, before it eats through whatever's left of me. Torres waited. Years of friendship had taught her that Alina revealed things in her own time, and pushing only made her close down further. Finally, Alina spoke again, her voice so quiet it barely carried over the bar's ambient noise. Helmand Province, 2019. I was providing close air support for a SEAL team that had been compromised during a high-value target raid. They were pinned down in a compound, taking fire from 3 sides, completely surrounded. The team leader was screaming into the radio, calling for danger close ordnance. And I mean danger close, 30 meters from friendly positions. That's close enough that fragments from my weapons could kill our guys as easily as the enemy. She paused, and Torres saw her friend's hand tighten around the glass. I had 15 seconds to make a decision. Follow standard procedures, which said don't fire danger close without ground commander's acceptance of risk, or trust that the team leader knew what he was asking for. I fired. Put 2 500-pound JDAMs through the windows of buildings bracketing their position. The explosions were so close that my own aircraft got rocked by the overpressure, and I was at 5,000 feet altitude. Torres held her breath. Alina continued. Radio went silent. For about 20 seconds I circled overhead, convinced I just killed 8 American SEALs. Then the team leader's voice came back through, laughing, actually laughing, said I'd just saved their lives. They'd taken no casualties, but I'd killed 37 enemy fighters. The team made it to extraction, and 6 months later I got a Silver Star. She finally took a drink, the vodka disappearing in one smooth motion. That should have been the end of it, should have been a good story, proof of precision, evidence that aggression and accuracy could coexist. But here's what haunts me, Lisa. In those 20 seconds of radio silence, I felt nothing. I wasn't afraid I'd killed them. I wasn't praying they were alive. I was already calculating my next target, my next shot, because in my mind they were already dead and I was moving on to the next problem. And when they came back alive, I felt disappointed. No, not disappointed, just empty, like their survival didn't register emotionally at all. Torres put her hand on Alina's arm. You were in combat mode. That's what training does. It lets you function when normal human reactions would paralyze you. Alina shook her head slowly. That's what I told myself, But it wasn't just that mission. It was every mission. I stopped feeling the weight of what I was doing, stopped processing the fact that every trigger pull, every weapon's release was ending human lives. I became this perfectly efficient killing machine, and the Pentagon loved it because I got results. But somewhere in there I lost something essential. The part that says killing should cost you something. The part that makes you human. She signaled the bartender for another drink. So those younger pilots, they're right, I am haunted, not by the people I killed, I can justify every single shot, but by the fact that I don't feel anything about any of it, and I don't know how to get that back or if I even should. Because the moment I start feeling again, the moment I hesitate, that's when I become a liability. That's when I get people killed, so I stay empty. I stay efficient. And I teach kids like Chen how to survive, even though I'm not sure I'm still alive in any way that matters. The second vodka arrived, and this time she left it untouched. Tors sat with her in silence because what could anyone say to that? Elena Volkov had become what war demanded she become, and the cost was measured in pieces of her own humanity that couldn't be recovered or repaired. After a long while, Elena stood. I should get some sleep. We run the exercise again tomorrow, and those F-35 pilots deserve my best effort. She walked out of the officers' club into the Nevada night, leaving Tors alone with the weight of secrets that couldn't be shared and traumas that couldn't be fixed. Outside, the desert air was cool, and overhead, stars blazed with the particular clarity that only exists far from cities. Elena looked up at those stars and remembered a version of herself that used to find them beautiful. Now they were just navigation references. Another piece of data in a world that had become nothing but targets and threats and geometric solutions to the problem of staying alive while making others dead. Day 2 of the red flag exercise began with different energy. The F-35 pilots arrived at the briefing room early, their earlier arrogance replaced by focused determination. They'd spent the previous evening reviewing the tactical replay, analyzing their mistakes, trying to understand how a single aircraft had dismantled their entire strike package. Major Chen stood at the front, briefing a modified approach. We're going to assume sensors are unreliable. We're going to fly mutual support formations that provide overlapping visual coverage. We're not going to trust our stealth, we're going to fly like she can see us perfectly. He paused, looked at his assembled flight. And we're going to remember that Ghost has one limitation we don't. She has to get close to kill us. So we maintain spacing, we watch each other's six, and we deny her the close-range engagement she wants. The briefing officer added tactical notes about Elena's known patterns, her preference for terrain masking, her willingness to fly dangerously close to obstacles, her tendency to exploit vertical space. The information was comprehensive, almost clinical, but it carried an undertone of respect. They were preparing to face her the way soldiers prepared to face a known enemy of exceptional skill. Elena attended a separate briefing with the exercise controllers. They'd added complications for Day 2 weather factors, additional threat systems, and a requirement that she operate under simulated electronic jamming that would limit her own sensors. The controllers wanted to see if the Blue Air flight had learned anything, and they wanted to see how Elena adapted when her advantages were reduced. Captain Volkov, we're tasking you with defense of the target area. Blue Air will be coming from multiple directions. You'll have simulated SAM support, but you're still the primary defensive asset. Questions? Elena studied the scenario parameters on the large display. The jamming, does it affect both sides equally? Affirmative. Everyone's sensors are degraded. She nodded slowly, a predator's smile crossing her face. Then it's an even fight, which means I have the advantage. The controller raised an eyebrow. How do you figure? You're one aircraft against 8. Because they've trained their entire careers to trust technology. When that technology fails, they lose confidence. I trained in Russia before coming to America. We flew aircraft that barely worked, with sensors that were older than the pilots. I learned to fight when nothing was reliable except your eyes and your instincts. So yes, It's an even fight, and that's all I need." She left the briefing and walked to the flight line where her Super Hornet waited. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ramp, and maintenance crews were completing final checks. Alina ran her hand along the aircraft's fuselage, feeling the slight imperfections where repairs had been made, the small dents and scratches that told stories of close calls. This aircraft had been her companion through situations that should have been impossible to survive, and she trusted it more than she trusted most people. "Ma'am," a young airman approached nervously. "I'm the crew chief for your aircraft today. Everything's green. She's ready to hunt." Alina looked at the airman, barely 20 years old, eager, proud of his work. "What's your name?" "Airman Collins, ma'am." "Collins, you see those patches on the fuselage, the panel replacements?" "Yes, ma'am." "Each one represents a day this aircraft brought me home when it shouldn't have been able to. This jet and I have an understanding. I push it beyond design limits and it keeps flying anyway. I trust you've maintained that relationship." The airman stood straighter. "Ma'am, I've gone over every system twice. This bird will do whatever you ask." Alina nodded. "Then I'll make sure I bring her back intact. Thank you for your work." The simple acknowledgement made Collins's entire week. He watched as Alina climbed the ladder, settled into the cockpit, and began her startup sequence with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. The engine spooled up, and the Super Hornet came alive under her hands, a machine that existed for one purpose, flown by someone who'd been shaped for the same purpose. She taxied to the runway and waited for clearance, watching the F-35s launch in pairs ahead of her. They were flying tighter formations today, already implementing lessons learned. Good. That meant they were thinking. But thinking wasn't the same as instinct, and in the chaos of aerial combat, instinct was what kept you alive when conscious thought couldn't process fast enough. "Ghost, you're cleared for takeoff. Good hunting." Alina advanced throttles and released brakes, and the Super Hornet accelerated down the runway with purposeful violence. Rotation, liftoff, gear retraction. Each action flowed into the next with mechanical precision. She climbed to altitude and turned toward the target area, checking her systems. The simulated jamming was already active, her radar display showing static and ghost returns instead of clear tactical picture. Without reliable sensors, most pilots would be half-blind. Alina felt more comfortable. This was how she'd learned to fight with eyes and intuition, reading the sky the way a predator reads terrain. The F-35s approached from 3 directions, executing the pincer movement Chen had briefed. It was solid tactics, textbook execution. They were forcing her to divide attention, to defend multiple vectors simultaneously. But Alina had faced worse odds in Afghanistan, in Syria, in places that remained classified. 8 aircraft was a challenge. It wasn't impossible. She dove toward the desert floor, using speed and terrain to mask her approach. The jamming worked both ways. They couldn't see her clearly either. She picked a canyon and threaded into it, flying barely 50 feet above the rocks, close enough that her wingtip vortices kicked up dust trails. The Super Hornet's terrain-following radar screamed warnings that she ignored, flying on visual reference and peripheral awareness that came from years of pushing boundaries. Chen's flight approached from the north, their sensors degraded but still functioning enough to provide general threat vectors. "Blue 3, take high cover. Blue 5, stay on my wing. We're going in." They didn't see Alina emerge from the canyon directly below them, pulled up vertical and fired before they could react. "Fox 2. Blue 5 is dead." The controller's voice marked Chen's wingman as killed. Chen broke hard, trying to evade, but Alina was already rolling inverted, pulling through to track him. The morning sun caught her aircraft's canopy, and for just a moment, Chen got a visual: the ghostly gray Super Hornet cutting through the sky with predatory grace, its pilot flying with an aggression that seemed to defy physics. "Blue 4, I need help. Ghost is on my 6. But Blue 4 was dealing with his own problems. Alina had fired a simulated AIM-120 on him before engaging Chen, and the F-35 pilot was defending desperately, pumping chaff and maneuvering hard. The missile tracking was simulated but deadly, and the controller's voice confirmed what the pilot already knew. Blue 4 is dead. 2 kills in 30 seconds, 6 F-35s remaining. Alina checked her fuel and smiled. This was teaching. This was showing them that technology fails, tactics fail, and all that remains is will and skill. She dove back toward terrain, disappeared into another canyon, and began positioning for the next engagement. For the next 15 minutes, the Nevada sky became a three-dimensional chessboard where Alina played offense and defense simultaneously. She'd fire a simulated missile, force an F-35 to defend, then use that pilot's evasive maneuvers to position on a different target. She exploited every terrain feature, used the sun as concealment, forced the blue air pilots to make split-second decisions that revealed their training gaps. Major Chen fought well, learning fast, adapting his tactics mid-engagement. He managed to survive longer than his wingmen, watching his strike package get whittled down one aircraft at a time. When only 2 F-35s remained his and his wingmans, he made a hard choice. Blue 6 were aborting the strike. RTB. The controller's voice cut through. Blue lead, mission failure if you abort. Understood, but I'm not going to lose my last wingman trying to prove a point. Alina heard the transmission and understood. Chen was learning. Better to survive and fight another day than die trying to accomplish a mission that had already failed. She let them go, didn't pursue as they turned south toward Nellie's. The exercise ended, and all aircraft began recovering to base. In the post-mission debrief, the tactical display showed carnage. 6 F-35s killed, 2 survived by withdrawing. The target remained unattacked, the mission failed. Major Chen stood before his flight, his face showing the particular exhaustion that comes from being thoroughly defeated by someone better. Alina entered and took her position at the front of the room, but this time her expression was different. Something almost like approval. "Better," she said simply, "much better." Chen looked up surprised. "Ma'am, we lost 6 aircraft and failed the mission." "But you learned. You adapted mid-fight. You flew mutual support. You made the hard choice to withdraw when continuing meant certain death. Those are all signs of tactical maturity. Yesterday, you flew like students. Today, you fought like pilots who understand the stakes." She brought up the tactical replay, pointing to specific moments. "Blue 3 forced me to maneuver here, which gave Blue 5 time to evade. That's good wingman work. Blue 4 defended well against the AMRAAM shot. He survived 30 seconds longer than he should have because he recognized the threat early. And Major Chen, your decision to abort was exactly correct. Mission failure is survivable. Death is not. You can't learn from being dead." The room's atmosphere shifted slightly. This wasn't just criticism, it was recognition. Alina continued, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen these lessons learned in blood. "Here's what you need to understand about combat. You will be outnumbered, your sensors will fail, your weapons will malfunction, and in those moments all you have is training and will. Yesterday I showed you what happens when you rely on technology. Today you started learning to fight without it. That's progress." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I'm hard on you because war is harder. I'm ruthless because your enemies will be more ruthless. And I don't accept excuses because in combat there are no excuses, only consequences. But I want to be clear about something. Every lesson I teach you is paid for in blood. Mine or people I flew with. Every tactic I show you came from situations where not knowing it would have killed me. So when I'm brutal in these exercises, understand it's not personal. It's debt. I owe it to the pilots who died teaching me these lessons to make sure you learn them in safety rather than discovering them in combat." Major Chen stood and faced her directly. "Captain Volkov, I owe you an apology. Before this exercise, I thought you were just another instructor trying to prove legacy aircraft still had relevance. I didn't understand that you're trying to save our lives." Alina nodded slowly. "Apology accepted. But understand something, Major. Your F-35 is an incredible aircraft. I'm not trying to diminish that. I'm trying to make sure you don't let the aircraft's capabilities become a crutch. Because the best technology in the world won't save you if you don't have the fundamentals. And fundamentals are built through adversity, through being pushed beyond comfort, through failing and learning why you failed. She picked up her helmet. We run this again tomorrow. Same scenario. But this time, I want you to brief a plan that assumes I know everything about your approach. Assume I've read your playbook. Assume I'm waiting in the exact place you don't want me to be. And then figure out how to accomplish the mission anyway. Because that's what combat actually is, solving impossible problems with inadequate resources against enemies who are trying very hard to kill you. As the pilots filed out, Chen approached her one more time. "Ghost, can I ask you something?" Alina waited. "How do you do it? How do you fly like death doesn't scare you?" She was quiet for a long moment, and when she answered, her voice carried a sadness that Chen hadn't heard before. "I don't fly like death doesn't scare me, Major. I fly like death is preferable to failing the people who depend on me. There's a difference. One is courage, the other is damage, and I'm not always sure which one I'm operating on anymore." She left before he could respond, walking out into the Nevada afternoon where her Super Hornet waited like a patient predator, its shadow stretching across the tarmac like a promise of violence to come. That evening, Alina found herself in her quarters, a simple room in the bachelor officer's quarters that showed almost no signs of personality. No photographs on the walls, no memorabilia from 12 years of service, just functional furniture and the bare essentials. She sat on the bed, still in her flight suit, holding a worn photograph that she kept in her wallet. The image showed a younger version of herself, maybe 23, standing with a group of pilots in front of an aircraft carrier. They were laughing, arms around each other, the easy camaraderie of people who faced death together and came back alive. Of the 7 pilots in that photograph, Alina was the only one still living. 2 had died in training accidents, 3 in combat. 1 had ejected over the Pacific and was never recovered. And Alina had survived, mission after mission, year after year, collecting medals and commendations while her friends collected flag-draped coffins. There was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Commander Torres standing there with 2 bottles of beer. "Thought you might want company." Alina stepped aside to let her in. Torres saw the photograph still in Alina's hand and understood. She'd heard the stories. Every pilot at Nellie's knew the legend of Ghost's first squadron, the one that had been decimated by a combination of bad luck, aggressive deployment tempo, and the harsh mathematics of modern warfare. "You're thinking about them," Torres said quietly. "I think about them every time I'm hard on these students, every time I push them beyond what they think they can handle, because I know what happens to pilots who aren't prepared." Alina set the photograph on the small desk. That photo was taken in 2014. We were all fresh from the training pipeline, all thought we were invincible. 2 years later, most of them were dead. Torres opened the beers and handed one to Alina. "It wasn't your fault." "I know, intellectually I know that, but there's a voice that asks, why did I survive when they didn't? What makes me special? And the answer I've arrived at is nothing. I'm not special, I'm not better. I'm just willing to do things they wouldn't do, cross lines they wouldn't cross, become something they refused to become, and that willingness is what kept me alive." She took a long drink, then continued. "My first combat loss was Lieutenant Ryan Castellano, Carlson Castle. He was my wingman in Afghanistan, and we were providing close air support for a Marine patrol that got ambushed. The ground commander was screaming for immediate fire support, and Castle had a clean shot, but he hesitated because there were civilians in the area. He was trying to make sure, trying to do the right thing. And while he was making sure, an RPG hit the Marines' position and killed 3 of them." Alina's voice remained flat, emotionless, but Torres saw her hands tighten around the beer bottle. Castle blamed himself, started second-guessing every decision. 3 months later, he hesitated again during a close air support mission, and in that hesitation, an enemy fighter got a tone on him. He died because he couldn't accept that sometimes the right thing, the moral thing gets people killed. And I learned from his death that morality is a luxury in combat. You don't have time for it. You have to make the hard choices instantly, live with the consequences, and move forward. So I stopped hesitating, and I started surviving. Torres was quiet for a moment before responding. Alina, you know that's not sustainable, right? You can't operate in moral vacuum forever. Eventually, it breaks something essential. It broke 2 years ago, Alina said simply. In Syria, but I'm still functional, still effective. And until the Pentagon decides I'm more broken than useful, I'll keep flying. Because this is all I know how to do anymore. This is what I am. The next morning's exercise was different. Major Chen had briefed an approach that assumed Alina knew their plan. His strike package split into multiple elements, each approaching from different altitudes and directions, creating a three-dimensional problem that forced her to make choices about which threats to address first. It was smart tactics, accepting that she'd kill some of them but trying to ensure enough survived to accomplish the mission. Alina recognized the maturity of the plan immediately. These weren't students anymore. They were becoming combat pilots, learning to think beyond individual survival to mission accomplishment, accepting calculated risk in service of objectives. This was what training was supposed to create. She engaged the first element as they approached high, firing simulated AMRAAM shots that forced them to defend. While they were evading, a second element came in low and fast, exploiting her divided attention. She managed to kill one but had to let others through to engage the target. The third element remained high cover, ready to support whichever element needed help. The engagement lasted 12 minutes, and when it ended, Alina had killed 4 F-35s, but 3 survived and successfully attacked the target. Mission success for Blue Air. First time in the entire Red Flag exercise that they'd accomplished their objective. The debrief room was different that morning. The F-35 pilots weren't celebrating exactly, but there was pride in their bearing, the satisfaction of learning hard lessons and applying them successfully. Alina faced them with something almost like a smile. Congratulations, you survived. More importantly, you accomplished the mission while surviving. That's the definition of success in combat aviation. She brought up the tactical replay, showing the engagement from multiple angles. Major Chen, your planning was solid. You accepted that I'd get kills and focused on ensuring enough aircraft survived to accomplish the objective. That's mature tactical thinking. Chen stood. Captain Volkov, I want to thank you. I came to Nelly's thinking I was already a combat-ready pilot. You showed me I was dangerous to myself and my wingmen. You broke down everything I thought I knew and forced me to rebuild from fundamentals. It was brutal, but necessary. The other pilots murmured agreement. Alina looked at them, these young aviators who'd arrived cocky and confident and had been systematically dismantled before being carefully rebuilt into something more durable. You want to thank me? Don't die. Don't get your wingmen killed. Don't become statistics that someone else learns from. Take these lessons, pass them to the next generation, and maybe some of them will survive too. That's how you thank me. She moved toward the door, then paused one final time. One more thing. In 2 weeks, some of you will deploy. You'll fly combat missions over places where people are trying very hard to kill you. When that happens, remember this. War doesn't care about your technology, your training, or your confidence. It only cares about who makes fewer mistakes. So be careful, be smart, and come home. Because the only good mission is one where everyone walks away. She left them with that, walking out into the Nevada morning where the desert sun was already heating the day toward scorching. Behind her, in the debrief room, the pilots sat in silence, processing lessons that would either save their lives or be forgotten until it was too late. The following week, Alina received orders that pulled her from the Nelly's instructor cadre. She was being reassigned, not to another base, but back to operational status. JSOC wanted her for a series of classified missions in Africa, supporting special operations forces against emerging threats. The Pentagon had decided she'd had enough rest. It was time for Ghost to hunt again. Commander Tors found her packing the minimal possessions in her quarters. "You're leaving." "Orders came through this morning. I deploy in 72 hours. "Africa." Alina nodded. "Can't discuss details, but it's direct action support, the kind of missions I'm good at." Tors sat on the bed, watching her friend methodically pack gear. "You could refuse. Request continued assignment here. You've done enough, Alina, more than enough." "Enough for what?" "I'm a weapon, Lisa. That's what I've become. And weapons don't get to decide when they're done being used. They just do what they're designed for until they break or become obsolete." "You're not a weapon, you're a person." Alina paused, holding a flight suit, and for just a moment something flickered across her face, maybe doubt, maybe longing for something she'd lost. "I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. And I'm not sure I want there to be. Because if I'm just a weapon, then I don't have to feel anything about what I do. I can just execute missions, follow orders, and let someone else worry about the morality." Tors stood and put her hands on Alina's shoulders, forcing eye contact. "Listen to me. You are not damaged beyond repair. You are not defined solely by your combat record. And you deserve peace, even if you don't believe you've earned it. Whatever happens in Africa, promise me you'll remember you're human. Promise me you won't lose the last piece of yourself that remembers who Alina Volkov was before she became Ghost." Alina was quiet for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "I promise I'll try. That's all I can offer." They embraced, two warriors who understood each other's demons, who'd seen the cost of military service measured in psychological damage that couldn't be quantified on medical charts. When they separated, Tors wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "Give them hell, Ghost, and then come back. Because this world needs people like you, even if you can't see your own value anymore." 3 days later, Alina climbed into a C-17 transport aircraft loaded with special operations personnel and classified equipment. The flight across the Atlantic was long and boring, filled with the particular tedium of military transportation. She sat among Delta Force operators, SEAL team members, and Air Force Special Tactics personnel, the silent professionals who operated in shadows and left no footprints. They knew who she was. Word traveled fast in the special operations community, and Ghost's reputation preceded her. One of the Delta operators, a master sergeant with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen everything, sat down beside her. "You're Volkov, Ghost." "That's right. Did a joint op with you in Syria, 2021. You kept us alive when everything went sideways." Alina tried to place him, sorting through hundreds of faces and missions until one night crystallized in memory: a compromised compound, enemy reinforcements closing from 3 sides, and a desperate request for fire support so close to friendly positions that headquarters initially denied the request. She'd ignored the denial and fired anyway, trusting her skill over someone's risk calculation made from 1,000 miles away. "Aleppo, the compound." He nodded. "You put 2 JDAMs through windows that couldn't have been more than a meter wide from moving aircraft at night, and every bomb was perfect. We walked out without a scratch while the enemy got obliterated. The team still talks about it. We call it the Ghost's miracle." Alina shifted uncomfortably. She didn't like being reminded of how many people owed their lives to her violence. It created debts she didn't know how to collect and didn't want. "I was just doing my job." "Your job saved 8 Delta operators that night. So when we heard you were joining this task force, we requested you specifically for air support. Because we trust you more than we trust anyone else to keep us alive when it gets bad." The weight of that trust settled onto Alina's shoulders like physical mass. These men-hardened professionals who didn't give trust easily believed in her completely. And that belief meant she couldn't afford to be broken, couldn't afford to hesitate, couldn't afford to feel anything that might compromise her efficiency. So she locked away whatever doubts Tors had planted, buried them beneath the familiar armor of tactical focus, and became Ghost again. The C-17 landed at a classified location in East Africa, one of the anonymous forward operating bases that dotted the continent, supporting operations that wouldn't appear in news reports or history books. Alina was briefed on her mission parameters: provide close air support for raids targeting terrorist logistics networks, fly reconnaissance missions over denied territory, and maintain readiness for emergency extractions if special operations teams got compromised. Her aircraft was a modified FA-18E that had been specifically configured for special operations support. Enhanced targeting systems, extended-range fuel tanks, and weapons loadouts optimized for precision strikes in urban environments. The aircraft bore no markings except a tail number, completely anonymous, flown by a pilot who'd become equally anonymous, a ghost supporting ghosts. The first mission launched at 2300 hours. Alina sat in the cockpit, engines idling, waiting for the ground team to infiltrate their target. The night was African hot, humidity making her flight suit stick to her skin. Through the canopy, she could see stars that looked different from Nevada, constellations that had guided ancient travelers before GPS and satellites made navigation a matter of numbers rather than knowledge. "Ghost, this is Reaper 6. The SEAL team leader's voice came through her radio, calm despite the fact that he was leading 12 men into hostile territory. "We're 5 minutes from target. Request you hold station at the designated coordinates. We might need immediate fire support." "Roger, Reaper 6. Ghost is on station, full loadout, ready to engage on your command." She advanced throttles and rotated into the African night, climbing to altitude and beginning an orbit over the target area. Below, through her targeting pod, she could see the compound, a collection of buildings in a rural area where intelligence suggested terrorist logistics personnel were coordinating weapons shipments. The SEAL team appeared on her infrared display as ghostly white figures, moving with tactical precision through darkness that was absolute to normal human vision but crystal clear through her systems. They breached the compound. Initial contact went smoothly, surprise was complete. Then everything went wrong simultaneously. Additional enemy personnel emerged from a building intelligence hadn't known about. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple locations, and the SEAL team leader's voice came through her headset with controlled urgency. "Ghost, Reaper 6 taking effective fire from building northeast of our position. We have wounded. Request immediate close air support." Alina zoomed her targeting pod, identifying the building. Enemy personnel were firing from windows, and her systems counted at least 15 combatants. The SEALs were pinned, unable to maneuver with a wounded team member. Distance from friendly to target, 35 meters. Too close for most pilots. For Alina, it was just another calculation. "Reaper 6, Ghost. I'm visual on your position and the target building. Danger close with friendlies at 35 meters. Confirm you want me to engage." "Ghost, we're dead if you don't. Cleared hot, hit that building." Alina selected a 500-pound GBU 38 JDAM, refined her aim point to target the building's center mass, and released. The weapon fell through African darkness, guided by GPS and mathematics, impacting exactly where she'd aimed. The building disintegrated in a fireball that briefly turned night into day, and when the smoke cleared, the SEAL team was moving again, dragging their wounded toward the extraction point. "Ghost, Reaper 6, good hit, you just saved our ass again." Alina didn't respond, just continued orbiting, scanning for additional threats, ready to deliver more violence if required. The SEALs made it to extraction. The wounded team member survived, and Alina returned to base as the sun rose over the African horizon, painting the sky colors that might have been beautiful if she'd still been capable of appreciating beauty for its own sake. The missions continued. Days blurred into weeks. Alina flew 97 combat sorties in 45 days, an operational tempo that was technically unsustainable, but somehow she sustained it anyway. She became a legend among the Special Operations Forces operating across East Africa, the pilot who never missed, never hesitated, never said a mission was too dangerous. They requested her by name. They trusted her with their lives. And she delivered, mission after mission, strike after strike, until her weapons count exceeded 300 confirmed enemy killed. One evening, after a particularly difficult mission where she'd kept a surrounded Special Forces team alive for 3 hours while they fought their way to extraction, Alina sat in her quarters and stared at her hands. They were steady. No tremors. No physical signs of the psychological strain. Just the hands of someone who'd become extraordinarily good at killing, who'd refined violence into an art form measured in precision and body counts. There was a knock at her door. She opened it to find the Delta Force Master Sergeant from the transport flight. He looked exhausted, his gear still dusty from whatever operation he'd just completed. "Captain Volkov, got a minute?" She stepped aside to let him in. He sat heavily on her bunk, the weight of combat evident in every movement. "I wanted you to hear this from someone on the ground. The team I'm with, we've run 37 direct action missions in the last 6 weeks. Our casualty rate is 0. You know why? Because you're covering us. Every mission we know Ghost is overhead, and we know if anything goes wrong, you'll move heaven and earth to keep us alive. That knowledge changes everything. It makes us bolder, smarter, more willing to take risks because we trust you absolutely." Alina sat in the room's only chair, maintaining careful distance. "I appreciate that, but it's just my job." "No, ma'am, it's more than that. I've worked with dozens of pilots over 20 years in special operations. Most are good, some are great, but you're something else entirely. You fly like our survival is personal to you, like every one of us matters individually. And I need you to know that we see that, we appreciate it, and we'll never forget it." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Also wanted to tell you something else. The guys are calling you the Guardian Angel, not Ghost anymore. Because that's what you are to us, an angel watching over us, keeping us alive when the world turns to hell. Thought you should know." He left before she could respond, and Alina sat alone in the silence, processing what he'd said. Guardian Angel. The irony wasn't lost on her. Angels were supposed to be beings of light and mercy. She delivered neither, just precision violence calibrated to keep Americans alive while making their enemies dead. But if that violence meant special operations personnel came home to families instead of being shipped home in boxes, then maybe the irony didn't matter. Maybe results were the only morality that mattered in places like this. The deployment was scheduled for 90 days, but at day 70, Alina received new orders. She was being pulled out early, reassigned to a task force operating in a different theater. The specific location was classified, but the mission parameters were familiar direct action support, immediate availability, high-risk operations. The kind of work she'd become synonymous with. Before departing, the commander of the Special Operations Task Force requested a meeting. General Marcus Webb was a 2-star with more combat deployments than most people had years of service. He'd led Special Operations Forces across multiple administrations and earned a reputation for brutally honest assessments of both success and failure. Alina reported to his makeshift office in what had once been a colonial administrative building. The general looked up from paperwork covered in classification markings and gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Captain. We need to talk." She sat, maintaining perfect military bearing, waiting for whatever assessment was coming. Webb leaned back, studying her with eyes that had evaluated thousands of warriors. "You've flown 97 combat sorties in 45 days, 0 friendly fire incidents, 314 confirmed enemy killed, 23 special operations personnel saved through direct action. Those numbers are unprecedented. You're the most effective close air support pilot I've worked with in 30 years." He paused, and Alina waited for the other shoe to drop. "With generals, there was always a but," Webb continued. "But I'm also looking at your psychological evaluation scores, and they concern me. You're exhibiting signs of extreme compartmentalization, emotional numbing, and what our psychologists call moral disengagement. In civilian terms, you've become so good at killing that you've stopped processing it as morally significant. And that worries me not because it affects your performance. It clearly doesn't. But because I've seen what happens to warriors who cross that particular line. Alina kept her expression neutral. General, I'm fully mission capable. My performance metrics are solid. Whatever psychological concerns exist aren't affecting my ability to execute. I know, that's exactly what worries me, because warriors who are too capable, who never break under strain, who can compartmentalize indefinitely, they don't stop when the mission's over. They keep going until something fundamental breaks, and when it breaks, it's catastrophic. He slid a file across the desk. I'm recommending you for mandatory psychological counseling, not because you've done anything wrong, but because I've lost too many good people to invisible wounds. And I'll be damned if I lose one of the best pilots I've ever worked with, because we failed to recognize she needed help before it was too late. Alina looked at the file without opening it. And if I refuse counseling, then you don't deploy with my task force. I'm not sending someone into combat who I think might be operating on psychological fumes. You want to keep flying. You talk to the shrink. You work through whatever demons you're carrying. And you prove to me that you're whole enough to keep doing this job. Because right now, Captain Volkov, I think you're running on empty, and empty eventually becomes broken. The silence stretched between them. A general who cared enough to force an uncomfortable conversation and a pilot who'd become too good at killing to remember why killing should cost you something. Finally, Alina nodded. I'll do the counseling, sir, but I'm telling you now it won't change anything. This is who I am. This is what I've become, and I don't know how to be anything else anymore. Webb's expression softened slightly. Maybe that's exactly what you need to figure out, Captain. Who Alina Volkov is when she's not being Ghost. Because the warrior isn't the whole person, and if you forget that, you lose something that can't be recovered. The psychological counseling sessions began a week later, conducted via secure video conference with a Navy psychiatrist back in the States. Commander Dr. Sarah Martinez specialized in combat stress and had worked with special operations personnel for 15 years. She'd heard every story, seen every variation of how war damaged people, and she approached Alina's case with professional curiosity and human compassion. Captain Volkov, I've reviewed your file. 12 years of continuous combat operations. 247 missions before this deployment, 97 more here. That's an extraordinary operational tempo. How are you managing the stress? Alina sat in a secure communications room, facing a screen showing Dr. Martinez's thoughtful expression. I manage it by not thinking about it. I focus on the mission, on the tactical problem in front of me. Everything else is just noise. That's a common coping mechanism. Compartmentalization can be very effective short-term, but it has costs. Are you sleeping well? 4 to 5 hours a night, sometimes less if missions run late. Dreams, nightmares. Alina hesitated. This was the line where honesty might ground her, might end her flying career. But something about Dr. Martinez's expression empathetic without being pitying made her answer truthfully. I don't dream anymore. I close my eyes and there's just darkness. Then I wake up. No nightmares, no dreams, just nothing. Dr. Martinez made notes. And how do you feel about the combat missions you've flown, the people you've killed? I feel nothing. They were threats. I eliminated them. Mission accomplished. Alina said it flatly, without inflection, stating facts rather than experiences. Nothing at all. No guilt, no regret, no satisfaction even. Nothing. Just the awareness that the mission was successful and I can move on to the next one. Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. Alina, may I call you Alina? I want you to understand something. What you're describing is called emotional numbing, and it's a classic symptom of prolonged combat stress. Your brain has essentially shut down emotional processing as a protective mechanism. But that protection comes at a cost. You're not just numb to the violence. You're becoming numb to everything. Joy, connection, hope, they all get filtered out along with the trauma. Alina met the psychiatrist's gaze through the screen. Is that a problem? I'm still functional, still effective. Functional and effective at being a weapon. But you're more than a weapon, Alina. You're a human being who deserves to feel human things. And right now, you're at risk of losing yourself completely to this persona you've created. Ghost isn't who you are. It's armor you've built to survive. And I'm worried that armor has become so thick that the person inside is suffocating. The conversation continued for an hour. Dr. Martinez gently probing, Alina reluctantly revealing pieces of herself she'd buried beneath tactical focus and mission orientation. By the end, they'd established a twice-weekly counseling schedule, and Dr. Martinez had prescribed a treatment approach that combined cognitive behavioral therapy with something she called moral injury processing, helping warriors reconcile their actions with their values. Alina left the session feeling exposed, vulnerable, as if someone had looked past Ghost and seen the damaged person underneath. She didn't like it, didn't want to be seen, but General Webb's ultimatum was clear: get help or stop flying. And flying was the only thing she had left that made sense. The counseling continued through her next deployment. Slowly, painfully, Dr. Martinez helped Alina begin processing 12 years of accumulated trauma. They talked about Lieutenant Castellano and the other pilots who died. They discussed the moral calculus of close air support, the impossible decisions where hesitation meant dead Americans and action meant dead enemies who were often barely trained teenagers fighting for causes they didn't fully understand. In one particularly difficult session, Dr. Martinez asked, Alina, if you could go back to before your first combat deployment, knowing everything you know now, would you still choose this path? Alina thought about it, really thought, allowing herself a moment of honesty that she usually avoided. No, I'd choose something else, anything else, because this path took everything from me. My friends, my capacity for normal emotions, my ability to sleep without medication, my sense that the world is anything other than threats to be managed and enemies to be killed. It took Alina Volkov and left Ghost, and I'm not sure that was a fair trade. Then why do you continue? Because people depend on me, because I'm good at this, because stopping now doesn't give back what I've lost, it just means I lost it for nothing. So I keep flying, keep killing, keep being the guardian angel or ghost or whatever they call me, and I try not to think too hard about the cost. Dr. Martinez's expression showed the particular sadness of someone who understood they were witnessing tragedy unfold in real time, unable to stop it. Alina, I want you to consider something. Maybe the bravest thing you could do, braver than any combat mission, would be to stop, to say, I've given enough, to choose healing over continued service, because continuing this way isn't strength, it's slow-motion self-destruction dressed up as duty. Alina sat with that for a long time before responding. Maybe you're right, but I'm not ready to stop yet. There are still missions to fly, still people who need protecting. When I've given everything, when there's nothing left, then I'll stop. But not before. The deployment ended. Alina returned to the United States with another chest full of medals, 2 more silver stars, another Distinguished Flying Cross, commendations from Special Operations commanders that praised her extraordinary skill and absolute reliability. The awards ceremony was efficient and impersonal, held in a secure facility where most attendees couldn't even know why she was being decorated. General Webb pinned the medals on her uniform and leaned close to whisper, You did good work, Captain, but please, for your own sake, take the counseling seriously. You deserve to be whole, not just functional. Alina nodded, accepting his concern even if she couldn't quite believe it. After the ceremony, she was given 30 days leave mandatory rest before her next assignment. The orders came with explicit instructions. Continue counseling sessions, engage in activities unrelated to military service, reconnect with aspects of civilian life. She rented a small apartment in San Diego, close enough to the ocean that she could hear waves at night. The first week, she did nothing. Just sat in the apartment, staring at walls, trying to remember how normal people filled their time. Television felt meaningless. Reading couldn't hold her attention. Exercise helped briefly, but even pushing her body to exhaustion didn't silence the constant low-level anxiety that came from not having a mission. On day 8, she drove to the beach and sat on the sand, watching surfers ride waves under a California sunset. Families played nearby, children building sandcastles, parents watching with relaxed vigilance. Normal life, the kind she'd protected but never participated in. And sitting there, watching people live without constant awareness of threat matrices and target priorities, Alina felt the first crack in the armor she'd built. She cried. Not quietly, not with dignity. She cried with the accumulated grief of 12 years, with the weight of 314 confirmed kills, with the memory of friends who died while she survived. She cried for Lieutenant Castellano, for the pilots in that photograph, for every special operations soldier she'd covered who came home because she'd been willing to kill without hesitation. And she cried for Alina Volkov, the young pilot who joined the Navy thinking she'd defend freedom and ended up becoming something she barely recognized. An older woman walking by stopped, concerned. "Are you okay, honey?" Alina wiped her eyes and nodded. "I'm fine, just remembering things." The woman sat down beside her, uninvited but not unwelcome. "My son served, Marines. He came back different. Took years for him to find himself again. But he did. So whatever you're carrying, know that it's possible to come through it." "Did he ever talk about what he did, over there?" The woman shook her head. "Not much. Said some things were too dark to share. But I knew just from looking at him that he'd done hard things. Things that cost him. And I was proud of him, not for the violence but for surviving it and choosing to keep being human afterward." She squeezed Alina's shoulder and walked away, leaving Alina alone with the sunset and the waves and the first genuine emotion she'd felt in years. It hurt. God, it hurt worse than any physical wound. But it was real. And real was something she'd been missing without knowing it. The counseling sessions continued, and with Dr. Martinez's help, Alina began the slow work of integrating Ghost back into Alina Volkov, not eliminating the warrior she'd become, but finding space for other aspects of herself that had been suppressed. It wasn't easy. Some days she wanted to quit, to retreat back into the comfortable numbness of just being a weapon. But she kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept trying to find a version of herself that could contain both the Guardian Angel Special Operations Forces trusted absolutely, and the human being who deserved to experience life beyond combat. After 30 days, new orders arrived. She was being reassigned again, but this time not to a combat theater. The Pentagon, in consultation with her medical team, had decided Alina Volkov needed a break from direct combat operations. She was being sent back to Nellis, back to the Adversary Tactics program, where she could teach without being deployed into active war zones. The orders came with a note from General Webb. "Captain Volkov, you've given more than anyone has a right to ask. It's time to step back to teach, to let the next generation carry some of the weight you've been bearing alone. This isn't a demotion. This is recognition that warriors deserve care too. Use this assignment to heal. We'll need you again someday, but only if you're whole." Alina read the note 3 times, trying to process the radical idea that stepping back could be anything other than weakness. Finally, she packed her bags and headed back to Nevada, back to the place where she'd broken Major Chen's strike package and taught him what combat actually required. Back to being an instructor, a guardian of knowledge rather than direct executor of violence. And maybe, just maybe, back to finding Alina Volkov buried beneath Ghost's armor. The return to Nellis felt both familiar and strange. The base looked the same: endless desert, rows of aircraft, the particular culture of military aviation that combined professionalism with aggressive confidence. But Alina was different. The counseling had opened something in her, a vulnerability she'd thought was permanently sealed away. She still flew with precision and aggression, still dismantled student strike packages with mechanical efficiency. But now, she allowed herself to feel the responsibility of it. Every pilot she trained was someone's son or daughter. Every lesson she taught might be the difference between that pilot coming home or dying in some foreign country whose name their parents couldn't pronounce. The weight of that responsibility, which she'd carried without feeling for so long, now pressed on her constantly. It made her a better instructor but a more exhausted human being. Commander Torres noticed the change immediately. They met for coffee at the base exchange, and Torres studied her friend with the careful attention of someone checking for cracks in a structure. "You're different, softer somehow. The counseling is working, or breaking me further. I can't tell which yet. You're feeling things again. That's not weakness, Alina, that's healing." Alina stirred her coffee, watching patterns form and dissolve. "It hurts more than the numbness. At least when I was empty, I didn't have to process what I'd done. Now I lie awake remembering faces of people I killed, wondering if they had families, wondering if I'm a hero or a monster or both." "You're neither. You're a warrior who did hard things in service of your country. That's all. Not a hero, not a monster, just someone who was asked to do violence and did it well. But doing it well doesn't erase that I did it. 314 confirmed kills, Lisa. That's 314 human beings who woke up one day and went to sleep permanently because I was good at my job. How do I process that? How do I live with being that efficient at ending lives?" Torres didn't have an answer because there wasn't a good one. Some questions don't have solutions, only the daily work of carrying them without being crushed. She reached across the table and took Alina's hand. "You live with it by remembering that for every person you killed, you saved dozens of Americans. You live with it by teaching the next generation so well that fewer of them have to make the choices you made. And you live with it by forgiving yourself for being human in situations where humanity was a luxury you couldn't afford." They sat together in silence after that, two warriors dealing with different versions of the same trauma. The cost of defending a country that would never fully understand what that defense required. As weeks became months, Alina found a rhythm. She taught aggressive tactics, dismantled student confidence and rebuilt it stronger, and attended counseling sessions where Dr. Martinez helped her slowly integrate her experiences into a coherent narrative that didn't require emotional amputation. It was progress. Painful, incomplete progress, but progress nonetheless. One afternoon, Staff Sergeant Morrison appeared at her office door. He'd been reassigned to Nellie's permanently after his earlier incident, and he'd spent months earning back his reputation through hard work and humility. He knocked hesitantly, and Alina gestured him in. "Captain Volkov, I wanted to apologize, again, for that day on the flight line." Alina looked up from paperwork. "Morrison, you apologized, it's over." "No, ma'am, it's not, because I've spent the last 6 months learning who you are, what you've done, what you've given, and I realize now that when I grabbed your shoulder, I wasn't just touching a pilot. I was being disrespectful to someone who saved more American lives than most people will meet in their lifetime. And I need you to know that I understand that now. I understand what it costs to be Ghost." Alina was quiet for a moment, then gestured to a chair. Morrison sat. She spoke carefully, choosing words that carried weight earned through experience. "You want to understand what it costs. It costs everything. It costs the ability to sleep without medication. It costs relationships because you can't explain where you've been or what you've done. It costs the version of yourself that believed in clear morality and simple heroism. And it costs pieces of your humanity that you don't even know you're losing, until you realize you can watch people die through a targeting pod and feel nothing but tactical satisfaction." She leaned forward. "But here's what you need to understand, Morrison. I'd pay that cost again, because the alternative is American soldiers dying. Is special operations teams getting overrun? Is pilots like Major Chen flying into combat unprepared and not coming home? So I became Ghost. I gave up Alina Volkov to be the weapon our country needed. And I don't regret it, even though it's destroying me slowly, because some things are worth the cost. Morrison left her office with a deeper understanding of the woman behind the legend, and Alina sat alone with her admission that she'd do it all again despite the cost, because that's what warriors did. They carried impossible weights so others didn't have to. They made sacrifices that couldn't be repaid, and they lived with ghosts that never stopped haunting. A year after returning to Nellie's, Alina stood on the same flight line where Morrison had grabbed her shoulder. She was watching a new class of pilots prepare for their first red flag exercise, seeing in them the same cocky confidence she'd once had. Major Chen was there too, now an instructor himself, teaching lessons he'd learned from Ghost about humility and tactical reality. Chen approached her as the sun set over the Nevada desert. "Captain Volkov, wanted to let you know 2 of the pilots I trained just completed their first combat deployment. Both came home safe, and both told me the most important thing they learned was from watching replay videos of you dismantling strike packages. They said you taught them that technology is powerful, but tactics and psychology win fights." Alina nodded, feeling something that might have been pride. "That's good. That means the lessons continue. That means maybe I've created something positive from all the negative." Chen hesitated, then asked the question he'd been carrying for months. "Do you have any regrets about becoming Ghost, about what it cost?" Alina watched the young pilots, saw their eager faces and confident gestures, and thought about the question seriously. Finally, she answered, "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the world is broken enough that people like me have to exist. I regret every life I took, even when those lives were threatening Americans. But do I regret becoming Ghost? No, because Ghost saved people. Ghost kept special operations teams alive, and Ghost taught pilots like you how to survive. If that required sacrificing Alina Volkov, then maybe that was a trade worth making." She turned to face Chen directly. "But here's what I want you to understand, Major. Don't let yourself become what I became. Stay human. Stay connected. Feel things even when feeling hurts. Because I gave that up and I'm not sure I can ever get it back. And that specific loss is one I wouldn't wish on anyone." The sun finished setting, leaving them in desert twilight where stars were beginning to emerge. Chen stood beside her in respectful silence, understanding that some lessons can't be taught in briefing rooms or during debriefs. Some lessons come from standing next to someone who's paid prices you can't calculate and carrying on anyway. Eventually, Alina spoke again, her voice quiet. "You know what the hardest part is? Not the killing, not the trauma, not even the nightmares when they finally came back. The hardest part is knowing I'd do it all again. That if tomorrow JSOC called and needed Ghost for an impossible mission, I'd go. I'd strap into that Super Hornet and I'd fly into whatever hell they pointed me toward. Because that's what I am now. That's what I chose to become. And choice creates obligation." Chen wanted to argue, to tell her she'd done enough, that she deserved peace. But he knew warriors like Alina Volkov didn't stop because they deserved to. They stopped when they physically couldn't continue. And she wasn't there yet. Might never be there. Might die in a cockpit somewhere, still flying, still protecting, still being the guardian angel that special operations forces trusted absolutely. They stood together on that flight line while new pilots prepared for morning sorties, and above them stars wheeled through darkness, the same stars that had guided warriors and witnessed violence for thousands of years. Alina looked up at them, and for just a moment she allowed herself to see them as beautiful again. Not just navigation references, not just celestial markers, but beautiful. It was progress, small, fragile, incomplete progress, but progress nonetheless. And maybe that was enough. Maybe being Ghost, carrying that weight, teaching those lessons, saving those lives, maybe that was enough purpose to justify the cost. Maybe warriors didn't need to be whole to be valuable. Maybe being broken in service of others was its own kind of heroism. Alina didn't know, might never know. But she'd keep flying, keep teaching, keep being the weapon and the guardian and the ghost, because that's what she'd chosen. And warriors lived with their choices, even when those choices destroyed them slowly from the inside. The Nevada wind picked up, carrying desert dust and the smell of jet fuel. Chen saluted and walked away, leaving Alina alone with her thoughts and her ghosts and the endless sky that demanded everything and promised nothing. She remained there until full dark, a silhouette against hangars and aircraft, a warrior contemplating wars both external and internal. Then she turned and walked toward her quarters, ready for whatever tomorrow's mission would bring, ready to be ghost again, because that's what the world needed from her. And Alina Volkov, whatever remained of her beneath the armor and the training and the 314 confirmed kills, would give the world what it needed until there was nothing left to give.